Awesome. Well, let me introduce Dr. Aymee Coget, who is a PhD expert in happiness science, leadership, and positive psychology. And for over 2 decades, Dr. Aymee has been dedicated to advancing the understanding and practice of sustainable happiness. And she speaks a lot on the future of happiness in America. She's also the author of 2 books and a highly sought after speaker. I mean, Aymee, you've been featured in Women's Day, Health, the New York Times. You've been featured on CBS, PBS, the list goes on. And you've worked with really big name corporations such as Wells Fargo, Facebook, Hilton, Procter and Gamble. And so I just want to start by thanking you for taking time to chat with the ShareWell community. It's a real treat to have you in this intimate setting.
Thank you so much for having me. I love ShareWell, and I'm so excited to bring in the secrets of lasting happiness far and wide.
Amazing. Well, first, let's start out, Aymee. I want to know a little bit of your journey. So, what drew you to the field of positive psychology and happiness research?
Great question, Amy. When I started my journey, I was 19 years old in college, and a lot of people in college have to make some decisions about what they're going to do with the rest of their life and what they're going to major in. And I was the same way. And I sat down with myself and did a lot of introspection. And what I realized, I put on my Gandhi hat, was the change I wanted to see in the world was more happy people. And so I dedicated my life's work to basically figuring out how to help people be happier. And I originally thought that would be through a work environment because I never heard anyone say, "Yay, it's Monday." Have you? Still, yeah. And this was back in 1996. And so I specialized in happiness at work, employee happiness in my undergrad. And I always thought if I knew I was going to talk about happiness, I needed to have a PhD. And so my PhD is in organizational psychology. And I found positive psychology when it entered into my field in 2003 through a book called Positive Organizational Scholarship from University of Michigan Business School. They have a whole positive business degree that you can get. And so at that point, I learned about happiness science, and that changed the game.
Wow, a positive business degree. That is amazing. Okay. And I'm curious, Aymee, do you know, is like happiness research and degrees in happiness, is that becoming more popular at other colleges, or was this just a very rare and an amazingly modern school?
Yes, they were one of the very first ones to target positive psychology at the University of Michigan Business School. However, there at the University of Pennsylvania, there was a master's degree that you could get in positive psychology. And then recently, like Claremont, you can get, I think in 2012 was the first time they had a PhD available in positive psychology. So those people, if they graduated on time, probably would be coming out into the world in like maybe 2020. So as a real doctor of positive psychology, since my focus was organizational psychology, I had to make friends with all of the positive psychologists and get them to teach me all their secrets.
I love it. I love it. Well, next question. So happiness, it's often a subjective term and kind of an elusive concept. How do you define happiness?
Great question. Most people are totally unaware of what happiness is. If I ask the audience, and go ahead and put it in the chat if you want your definition of happiness, and probably it's different. And like every single person has maybe a different understanding of happiness. And so I like to boil it down to the types of happiness. And the first type of happiness where 100% of the population has experienced it is called hedonic happiness. And so this is when something good happens, you're happy, a person, a place, a thing, a circumstance, that piece of chocolate, a vacation, some new shoes, a new electronics, something good happens, you get promoted, you're happy. It's in your brain. However, something bad could happen and right after that, and so then that happiness is long gone. And so a lot of times people think I'm working to sustain the emotion of happiness, and that is impossible because of the nature of emotions, they come and go. And so the second type of happiness is eudaimonic happiness, EUDAIMONIC, eudaimonic. EU is good, daemon is spirit, IC is nature up, like eudaimon, but eudaimonic. And so eudaimonic is more like deep inner contentment, sense of fulfillment in your heart. And this type of happiness comes from having meaning and purpose in life, being actualized as your authentic self, and using your strengths. So once you can dial in basically to your heart's maps, meaning authenticity, purpose, and strength, you can develop a long-lasting contentment independent of what your emotional state is. And the third type of happiness is called charonic happiness, like bliss and joy. You might have been at a meditation or church or somewhere, and someone is like, their eyeballs are rolling back in their head, like, oh my God. And you're like, what is going on? Well, they're feeling a connection to something larger than themselves. And so that level of faith and trust is what elevates us into a state of bliss and joy. So there's emotion of happiness, a state of contentment, and then a state of bliss and joy.
Got it. Okay. And then the levels, hedonic is the lowest level, then eudaimonic, then the charonic. Is that
That's
right?
right. That's right,
Okay.
Aymee. You're a good
Okay.
happiness student.
Thanks, Aymee. Okay, wonderful. And so next question, how does one go up those levels, or do you want, like, what, yeah, what, or do you bounce around from them all the time and that's okay? Like, what would be optimal happiness? What would you suggest? Yeah.
What is optimal happiness? Sure, just give it to us in the first 5 minutes, Aymee. Well, first of all, before we get to the optimal happiness, you have to eliminate barriers to happiness. And so one of those things would be helping yourself become a positive thinker, being in the moment, savoring the gifts in this moment, using smiling and laughing and singing and exercise and eating healthy. You know, there's a lot of things that just go into generally feeling good. However, one other problem is that people get stuck on the emotional roller coaster. Like if things are good, you're happy. If things are bad, you're unhappy. Or you get stuck in the hedonic treadmill, always looking to get the next thing that makes you happy. You know, somebody told me once they just keep going to the ice cream store. You know, so this is the hedonic treadmill, and that just never leads you anywhere. And then there's also hedonic adaptation, where you imagine that you're going to be happy in the future. I call that the happiness mirage, basically. When everything is perfect, I will be happy. When I achieve my goals, I will be happy. And it turns out that you will become unhappy within 3 to 6 months. And so in order to achieve optimal happiness, you have to focus on growing it from the inside out versus getting the world to be perfect. If anyone has attempted that and made it work, let me know, because I haven't figured that out yet. I mean, just wait 5 minutes and watch the news. You'll find something that'll probably make you unhappy. So taking charge of your own well-being is really important. To escalate into, you know, your optimal happiness after you stop shooting yourself in the foot, basically, I do recommend following my 5 steps. So after a couple decades of doing this, it turns out there are 5 steps to sustainable well-being. You might want to write it down. And it's 1, being empowered, deciding that you're going to take charge of yourself and your own well-being. And the second step is positive mood. Decide that you are going to develop a positive mood from the inside out. And I tend to recommend a morning routine, a daytime routine, and a sleep routine, all of positive mood boosting techniques that have been scientifically proven to work. And thirdly, you use resilience tools like forgiveness or acceptance, or using your strengths, or seeing the good and the bad, or you realize that there are tools that you can use to combat any happiness challenge you might be having. And then those are the basics. And then once you get the basics handled, then you can get to the good stuff of contentment and bliss. And that's when you're in touch with your heart's voice and you really have found meaning and purpose. You might be in your blissful calling. You're actualized as your authentic self using your strengths. And then the top level of happiness is bliss and joy. And so that comes from eliminating fear. Are you ready to do that? A lot of people are like, what? And so just allow yourself to kind of go through these different levels, and ultimately, your light switch will go on.
Yeah, I love that. Well, there was so much there. I was taking frantic notes. If anyone else was taking some notes and wants to pop them in the chat for all of us, we could all benefit from that. We did get a comment. So you mentioned in the positive mood aspect, having a morning and evening routine. And we got a question, like, what is an example of a daytime routine for happiness?
Right. So I do recommend a morning routine, a daytime routine, and a sleep routine. And there is this amazing theory of positive psychology called the broaden and build theory of positive emotion. And it gives us a mathematical formula of 3 to 1. So if we have 3 positive emotion experiences to every 1 negative emotional experience, we will facilitate an upward spiral in our life. And so if you wanted to engage in happiness boosting techniques, at least 3 a day, that would be really helpful. And probably you would see your life go, up instead of in a downward spiral. So in the daytime routine that I recommend exercising at least 20 minutes a day, including walking. I recommend a positive thinking practice where you take a small memo pad with the binding on the side, and any negative thought that you might have, you write it down on the left-hand side of the page and then convert it to the opposite positive on the right-hand side of the page. And so this positive thinking practice helps move your inner critic into your inner colleague, which is basically a killer of your happiness. If you have a hardcore inner critic, it's going to be a challenge to achieve that inner joy. And it stops rumination as well. So exercise, positive thinking, positive speaking. So if you eliminate certain words like no, not, don't, can't, should, but, and try, then you start having a better life, basically. So if you want to think about your upward spiral, do you want any no's, nots, don'ts, can'ts, shoulds, buts, and tries in your upward spiral? You want positive language in your upward spiral. You want superb, magnificent, wonderful, I got this, So watch what you're speaking is also connected to what you're thinking. Another exercise I recommend for the daytime routine is living in the moment. And so if you focus on living in the moment and savoring the gift in this moment, using your senses to really help you be right here instead of thinking about the past or the future, that's really helpful.
I love that. Yeah, thank you, Aymee. And I see some questions coming in. Keep them popping in, and then we'll switch over to Q&A in about 10 minutes, and we'll take all of them. But yeah, you're just giving us so much wisdom right now, Aymee. I think all of our brains are like, whoa, what's happening? This is amazing. So Aymee, I did want to get back to mental health generally. We're going to dive in the Q&A and more positive psychology tips. But I was curious, could you elaborate on how positive psychology differs from traditional mental health approaches?
Great question. And there is a huge difference in positive psychology versus traditional psychology. So traditional psychology started in the 1940s, and it was basically according to, let me start with Dr. Martin Seligman. So Dr. Martin Seligman, he is the founder of positive psychology. Woo! And he is a former APA president. And so he was in the garden one day with his 5-year-old daughter, and she said, Daddy, why are you such a grump? And so he cares about what his daughter says. And so he was like, yeah, why am I such a grump? And so he went to the research like any other psychologist would at that point. And he realized there was a 17-to-1 ratio of depression to happiness studies, and said that something needs to change. And so this was a huge paradigm shift. So instead of focusing on the problems or what's wrong with people, we started focusing on love and happiness and like the flourishing aspect of humanity.
That's incredible. Thank you, Aymee. I was not aware of that, but that makes sense that you said depression studies outnumbered happy studies 19-to-1.
17-to-1. Mm-hmm.
Wow. In terms of 17-to-1. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into some of this research. I know a lot of us will be interested in it. Your methodologies are rooted in neurological research. And so I'm curious, can you explain how neuroscience informs your approach to sustained happiness?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you think about the timeline, so there I was in 1996 saying, I'm going to help people be happier. And then in 1998, positive psychology came around. And then in 2003, it intersected into my field. And then in 2006, I created the happiness makeover that actually helped somebody who was very depressed. And then in 2010, there was an amazing research study that showed that these particular happiness boosting techniques that I'm sharing about gratitude, exercise, kindness, and more do in fact alleviate symptoms of depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, and ADD and ADHD, and they can show changes in the brain. So if you look up the Mayo Clinic image of a happy brain and an unhappy brain, you can see that one is like lit up and the other one is more dark. And so what does that really mean? Well, I could ask somebody a question who is depressed, and then they would be without the answer. However, if I give 3 happiness boosting techniques in the next 5 minutes, ask the same question, they have an answer. And so what is the difference? It's the neuroplasticity. It's the ability to create new neuronal connections. Then we can move an unhappy brain into a happy brain by doing certain activities.
That's incredible. Yeah. And I'd love to know, Aymee, so you've written 2 books and you just talked about the happiness makeover and how you've done that with people, and you have all these strategies. I'm assuming one of your books has some of these that we could get our hands on, right?
Yes, yes, you
Okay.
can go to Amazon, I think Target and Walmart, and get my books. The one with the strategies for the routines and the tools and the meaning and purpose and the contentment and the bliss and all the good stuff. Happiness for Humankind, Sustainable Happiness in 5 Steps. Happiness for Humankind Playbook. And then the one that focuses on being able to find your purpose in life or come into your blissful calling is called Find Your Blissful Calling. It's a workbook. It's about 30 pages.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm writing them both in the chat in case anyone wants to pick them up. Great. So yeah, Aymee, I'm curious, looking ahead, what are your goals or aspirations you said you wanted to make the world a happier place. Like, what's next for you to continue doing that?
A grandiose goal, right? Well, first of all, buy my books, everybody. Second of all, I have written thousands and thousands of pages. I have a home study coming out. It has 113 exercises. It really brings the playbook to life. It's 450 pages. And so I'm working to make a generative AI character that replaces myself to be able to be anywhere at any time for anyone to be able to facilitate the morning routine, the daytime routine, or the sleep routine, or someone to be there with a positive psychology brain in the moment of need. Also, I'll be getting out there with videos more on TikTok and Instagram, and you'll start seeing me more often than the last decade because I'm ready to come out of the garage and into your lives.
Wonderful. Well, we'll pass along your TikTok and Insta and whatever links you want in the ShareWell chat, and we'll send a follow-up email after this. So we're definitely supporting this new media Aymee version. Great. And then Aymee, before we switch over to Q&A, so I'll ask one more question. But if you all have questions, can you start typing them into the chat now? And our moderator will pick some of them. And if you want to be called up to the stage and ask your question, we ask you to turn your camera on, please. Let's make it more personal. Okay, last question. Aymee, I am curious, what do you see, like, or how do you see community and its impact on happiness?
That's what I love about ShareWell is that this offers a community because so often people feel isolated or alone or, like they're the only one suffering from depression or anxiety. And it's hard to connect to like normal people because you're so much in your blues. And so I really see ShareWell community as like that peer support that has never been there before for others. And, I've facilitated for a few years now these sessions, and it's really great to see people sharing the tools that they found that work and then inspiring others and being there for each other. And also this can all happen and you're on your couch, and so you don't even have to go anywhere. It's fantastic to be able to talk to somebody who understands you, who's not maybe a doctor or who's analyzing you, or just someone who's gone through what you've been through before. And this also helps really reduce stigma. And so part of the problem is that many people tell me I am really deeply unhappy, but nobody knows. And so people don't feel safe to be able to share the truth of how they feel. Most people are like, how are you? I'm good. And then you throw it under the rug and then suffer. And so I think ShareWell offers an excellent opportunity for people to kind of normalize their mental health as something that is okay to have a down day, or, if you've had a trauma, to have a real down day, or, just give yourself permission to be human.
Aymee, thank you so much. I'm giving you a happiness hug.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Everyone, let's all give each other hugs. This
Yay,
makes us
group
happy.
hug.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll see you at the next one. You showed up for yourself and for your happiness. Congratulations.